Pat Jennings. I'm with the Murrieta Valley Historical Society. Before I get going, I'd like to thank Rebecca and you guys at the Historical Society here in Temecula for the invitation. So tonight we're going to be talking about the Yoder Family Legacy and mainly their farming legacy. So a little bit of background. In about 2016, my wife and I had a historical booth at the Murrieta barbecue. You guys can hear me okay? And so a guy came by named Paul Yoder. I had known Paul collaterally because I had gone to school with his younger sibling. And he said, I have this flash drive, you want to make a copy of it, and it is full of farming photos from our family. So I said, yeah, great. So I downloaded it, and what I found was actually pretty shocking. So I've dealt with a lot of family photo collections and histories and stuff, and you might have 2, 3, or 4 farming photos, the rest are family photos. Well, what he gave me was about 350 images, only about 20 of them were family, all the rest were farming. And so on the left is Charlie Yoder. At the time, this was taken about 2017. Charlie at that time was 98, hoping to make his 100th birthday. He missed it last year by about 2 weeks. Passed away a couple weeks short of his 100th birthday. And the guy next to him is his son, Paul. Paul gave us all the images. So after I got all these photos and I looked at them, I'm fairly familiar with old equipment. I've been an equipment operator in a past lifetime besides being a firefighter. And so what I did is, my ever-loving tech support wife printed them all for me. So I numbered them 1 to about 353 or something like that. So I go up and see Charlie and Paul, where Paul was in a rest home up in Wildemar. And I said, okay, tell me about photo number 1. And I audio recorded. So it ended up being about 7 or 8 hour plus audio recordings that documented their family history, farming history especially. So a few of the slides you see tonight, you'll see a number on them. That was my inventory number when I had talked to him. So about a month or 2 ago, I got an invitation to do a presentation for Menifee, because one of their ranches we'll be talking about was right there at the edge of Menifee in Paris. And so after the meeting, I was approached by Mary Yoder, who was a couple years older than me in school, and her Uncle David. So that's in there. So Uncle David proceeded to lay on the table several photo albums of photos I hadn't seen before. So in the interim, I had gone and met with Mary and David and scanned what David had currently, and my plan is to do exactly with David what I had done with his brother Charlie and document that stuff. So that's a work in progress. Some of the stuff I'll show you tonight came from Uncle David, and I don't really have too much history on it other than what I know about the Yoders from other sources. So I have to thank them and Paul and Charlie for this information. That's the founder of the family. That's Samuel E. Yoder. This was taken about 1911 in Hemet. They moved. Samuel and his family moved from Iowa in the 1880s to Hemet. They had 80 acres there on Mayberry and Lyons. So he was the start of the farming dynasty. They came out and they were farming at that time alfalfa and apricots. Hemet had a big fruit, apricots, peaches, stuff like that. As you all know, in those days, you farmed with horses. Very labor intensive, you ended up with a lot of horses. This shows their place there on Mayberry in 1960, second cutting of alfalfa on irrigated property. Hemet was lucky they had irrigation. So they were getting water down from up above at Lake Hemet so they could grow the type of crop. Later on, the family branched into dryland farming, which was mainly oats and wheat. So you can see, 2-horse team probably pulling a sickle bar mower. And this is what labor looked like in those days. Everything done by hand, everything pulled by horses, and so 80 acres was probably a lot to deal with, you know, with a family-sized ranch farm. You see him in the background. Wasn't much out there like so many of the places. Kind of a faded out photo. You can see my inventory number on the top. They're loading hay. That was July 1911 over at Hemet. Baler. Anybody work with an old-fashioned baler? It took 2 or 3 people to run it. In the family photos, I have not seen how they powered this. It would have been either powered, probably 1911, most likely by a steam engine or steam traction engine. Could have been powered by a horse sweep. Anybody familiar with a horse sweep? You put 4 horses in a team. Horses would walk in a circle. Gear mechanism would turn. They'd run the belt up, and they would power their equipment with it. A lot of, again, a hard way to make a living. So over in Hemet, one of Samuel's sons was Maurice J. Yoder. Most people have been around here a while remember M.J. Yoder, same guy. He had a big family. Well, and we'll get to his family here in a second, but Maurice was quite the inventor. During the course of his career, he built that tractor. He built 3 tractors. I'd love to know where any one of them went today. He worked for a foundry up in Alhambra, worked on building the castings and everything on his spare time at his own expense. This was one of the tractors he built. This was another one, interestingly enough. It's pulling a 3-bottom plow, probably about a 20-25 horsepower tractor. Interestingly enough, there was a kind of a thing during the teens, the 19-teens, where they were trying to convert their horse-drawn equipment into something they could use with a tractor. So apparently he came up with what they called a rain drive tractor. So we got the operator sitting back there. He's sitting on there. There's no operator on the tractor. He was steering and operating the tractor by a set of reins, just like he would a team of horses. Now they weren't obviously very successful. Another tractor, this is one of the third ones he built over there in the Hemet area, all around 1915, 16, and 17. Already the family was working toward mechanization. Tractors in that era were about what you see here. He built a tractor that was pretty comparable to most tractors everybody else was building back in the day. The steam traction engine technology then was actually pretty good. About 1929, this is the first view. It's really hard to see, but right here is a harvester and a tractor. I have not got definite information from Uncle David. This is one of his pictures. But with the fuel tank and everything like that, looks like a Caterpillar 30. So we're looking 1929. So they'd already begun moving into mechanization. Again, I'm not sure where this picture was taken. Could have been Murrieta or could have been Long Valley. This is M.J. Yoder. He was the father of Charles. He had 3 kids. This one, or 5 kids. This one was taken about 1935 with one of their then brand new TD40 International or McCormick Gearing tractors. This is his family, M.J. and his wife. 3 sons: Charlie, Joseph, and David, and Medina, and Evelyn. All, of course, you know how the wives had to support the family farming operation, so unfortunately they only took pictures of their end of it, so we don't really have anything on the female side of it. But all 3 of the sons were heavily involved in the farming business. So a little bit of background: they had 80 acres on their Hemet property. They farmed 2 sections, 1,280 acres, what they called the Lakeview property. That was what's now the bottom of Lake Paris. The Rice family farmed the ones next to them, so there was about 4 sections in the bottom. They had 7 sections in Paris, off Watson and Murrieta Road, right at what is now the border between Menifee and Paris. That was their headquarters ranch. That's where they did most of the farming operation. Charlie and his dad M.J., they farmed the Murrieta area. Most significantly for Temecula, they farmed Long Valley. So people familiar with Long Valley, there was the Yoder camp. Now it's the Maurice Winery. They farmed that land from 1921 until 1966. They had a deal with the Vail Cattle Company where they would they plant 1 year because they had to leave 1 year fallow, of course. So Vail would run his cattle on it the next year. probably had a pretty good volunteer crop if they had good rain, so they rain-fed their cattle. And then they plant the next year. They went on until 1966, after Vail sold, and they started developing that out there. Rancho California Water District pushed the water out there, and they switched to citrus. Alex Burrell, some of the documentation I read, oversaw a lot of that operation, and Paul Yoder and one of the Shell brothers Paul actually told me they did a lot of the grubbing and subsoiling for a lot of the citrus groves that are now Buck Mesa, Long Valley. So this was the family. This was their parish ranch. Like I said, Watson Road and Murrieta Road. Typical ranch on the side, other than the grain tanks. It was pretty typical of most ranches of that era. But they were sitting on, I think, 5 sections of land there. So they had a lot of farming. Another view, could be anybody's ranch, but they were sitting on a lot of land. Watson and Murrieta Road's out here. This is kind of looking to the northwest.
Can you speak up a little bit? I didn't hear that.
Oh, there, Watson Road and Murrieta Road kind of looking to the north. More west. So we get into the farming picture. This is taken at the parish ranch. You can barely make out the mountains in the background there. This is one of their TD40s. At one time they had as many as 7 of these TD40 tractors. That was basically the backbone of their farming operation. They had a couple of earlier wheel tractors, but they based their operation mainly on trawler tractors. As you can see with all this here, they were breaking ground for planting. This was probably sometime in the mid-1930s to late 1930s. The TD40 diesel was a diesel tractor rated about 40 horsepower. It's pulling a 10-foot Wheatland disc. Some of the earlier photos showed a moldboard plow, but once the farmers in this area found out they were dealing with some rocky soil, moldboard plows didn't work very well. So they came up with a Wheatland plow, which is basically a disc plow. Big offset disc that turned the soil. Hemet, Lakeview, or the 1280 and Paris were flat and they were sandy, so they didn't have too much of a trouble. Murrieta, and especially Long Valley, rocky and hilling. Big problem when you're trying to till and when you're trying to harvest. So this is what they were doing back then. This was a theme that was repeated several times through their photographic history. A set of 3 TD40s, each pulling a 10-foot Wheatland. This particular one, that's probably the parish ranch. So pretty labor intensive. You're still using 3 operators, even though you would cover a lot of ground during the course of the day. Irrigation. So not everybody had water. They had water at Hemet that came in on the Hemet Water District, their ag side. At Paris they had wells, so they irrigated. They grew alfalfa and potatoes out there. But with electrification, this one's 1949, they probably didn't have electric out in the field. So they have a pump here, there's ditches. They're running a belt off the back of this. This looks like a D6 Caterpillar, which they went to Caterpillar equipment very quick. So that's how they would power their wells. So when they were done irrigating there, they take that tractor and belt, move it to the next section and do it. Another view of the flood type of irrigation that they did out there, ditches and stuff like that. They would fill those ditches up and then they would flood irrigate, mainly for alfalfa. Potatoes, they grew potatoes out there. You can see it's more of a row crop type operation, so they had to run hills and all that stuff. There was another guy, I can't remember everything, that's on my note. Huh? Whoop, go back. Man, it really went back. Operator. So, some other families co-opted with them to grow potatoes. And alfalfa, of course. This is their picking hay up, bales and stuff like that. This is probably also at the Parish Ranch. You can see they're doing some harrowing, but to take advantage of the bigger tractors, you can see they made a homemade gang setup and they're pulling like 6 harrows. Normally a wheel tractor would pull 1 or 2, so they would hook up and they'd haul 6. Their operation as they went along just got bigger. We'll move down to Murrieta. Charlie and his father MJ did a lot of the farming in the Murrieta area. So what you see here is the red line. This was the land they were farming in Murrieta from the mid-1930s up until about 1963. So you can see on this water map, this is 215-15, the red line. Basically, Charlie Yoder and his dad were farming what's essentially the center of the city of Murrieta. Unlike Paris, Lakeview, and Hemet, this was rocky, hilly ground. So more of a problem in getting their work done. This is what it looked like. This picture was taken in Murrieta. Again, this is 1930s, early 1940s. They're running their TD40s, pulling the 10-foot Wheatland plows. This is probably an area, it's probably between the 215-15 freeway, probably north of what's now Los Alamos Road. Same area, just a little bit different shot. A lot of these pictures MJ Yoder himself took, according to the family. This one, of course, easy to recognize. This is in the just north of the Alta Murrieta area. The hogbacks in the background, be east of the 215 freeway, probably north of Los Alamos Road. A little bit different. They're still running the TD40s, but this harvesting scene, they're running 2 harvesters. Everybody asked what the extension's for. Well, fire was always a big problem, so they would run their exhaust stacks really high. So if they threw out a hot spark, it would be way up, and then by the time it got to the ground, it was cool. Not sure about these harvesters. I believe they're Holtz. Later on, they ran mainly John Deere 36 harvesters. These are a little bit different in that, if you see here, they weren't storing the grain on the harvester and then offloading it into a truck and then taking it into the yard. They were sacking it. So they had to have a tractor operator, and they had to have what they call the header tender. He was a guy with a big metal wheel. He would keep the header, or the part that went like this with the cutters, he would keep the header level and off the ground and out of the rocks. And then the other guy, he'd be the guy, as the grain come through the separator, he would be the guy when the sack filled up, he'd dally the sack up, and he'd kick it off and then shoot and run it out. This might actually be a grain sack there and up there. And it would slide down the chute onto the ground, and then later on they would have to go and pick it up. A lot of labor involved. A little bit later picture, this is probably a TD14, Alice Chalmers. They had gotten a couple of different brands of tractors. They ran McCormick Deering International TD40s, and then they ran some of these Alice Chalmers. This is a Model 36 John Deere harvester. One time they had about 7 or 8 of these things. The difference is, I don't know if the earlier ones we saw, they've been modified to carry the grain there. There's the auger that would load it off onto the truck, or they were totally different harvesters, a thing that I'm trying to research with the family. Interestingly enough, they had this tiller wheel, which worked fine because that was held the front end of the harvester upright. So it hooked to the drawbar on the tractor. Fine and good till you ran that thing in a ditch in the field, and then the whole thing upset the apple cart. They cured that, ever inventive, like most farm families. They went under the harvester and they built a skid on it. So this, see this ditch right here? They probably had that either at Murrieta or Long Valley because of the hills and everything. So when the separator or the harvester went along, and when it fell over like that, it just messed everything up. The header went up in the air and everything got messed up. So they built these skids, so they just dragged the harvester across it. Because their crawler tractor, for the most part, would just walk right across that. A little bit later picture, this is one of their D8s. Again, this Model 36 harvester, once they went to the bigger tractors, they took that tiller wheel off because that tractor would hold that harvester. So they got in the horsepower business. Started right after World War II. At one time they had 7 or 8 of these D8 Caterpillars. And that was the backbone of their whole operation. They moved those things everywhere. Harvester crew, probably taken at Paris. They didn't know some of the people, but Huck Shell, Buster Shell, Joe and Bill Rice were some of the people that they named. So, you know, you needed at least an operator on the tractor and probably 2 people on the harvester to get that thing to go. TD18, You see, they're starting to mechanize a little bit. They never really ran anything that had hydraulics. Most people are familiar with the hydraulic systems today that operate everything. They use these cable control outfits that everything was operated by cable. The cable would pull in and it would go back out by gravity. It's a hard way to do business, state of the art back then. So by the mid-1940s, they tell me, after World War II, a lot of surplus equipment became available after the war. So they went in big with the Caterpillar. So this is a Caterpillar D8. Like I said, at one time they had as many as 7 of those, backbone of their whole farming operation. These were top-of-the-line tractors in their days, about anywhere from 110 to 127 horsepower. They would just pull anything. Big in the ag business and big in the construction business. They were buying these tractors for about $5,000, which was a lot of money then, but not the cost of a new one. Right after World War II, about 1949, 1950, they came up with a new series of the D8 that had a different transmission setup. These here, you can barely see it, what they call a quadrant bar. It was a big shift lever with a big hoop on it. And every time you want to change gear, you had to wrestle that thing around and engage it. The later ones had a transmission, but they had a forward reverse in it. So it was one lever forward, one lever for reverse. So all the older construction equipment they started selling because they went to the newer Caterpillar. Well, the Yoder family was buying them and putting them to work in the fields because it didn't matter to them because they weren't going backwards at the time, like you do when you're doing construction work. They even got so well at what they were doing and bought so many Caterpillar, they even got an advertisement of the Johnson tractor. I think this was in the 1952 or something around there. David Yoder and his brother Joseph. The two brothers there also had ranches or farms in French Valley. They had their own, but they also operated the family operation. I haven't found out exactly how much between the two of them they were farming in French Valley, other than I know they were farming in French Valley. So once they put that horsepower to work, this is what you started seeing. Those are 3 10-foot grain drills, and probably in front of it there's 30 feet of harrow. This is at Paris, so you can tell the difference. They're pulling it with one tractor, one operator, and probably going a lot faster. Again, this is at Lakeview, a D8, and they're pulling 30 feet of wheatland plows with one tractor. So covering that kind of acreage means they could till. Once they got the rain, they could optimize their planting, and so just made them money. So not only did they farm, if they were going to irrigate or they were going to do something like that, they would have a setup like this. Of course, this is a D8. It's a big land plane, so if anybody's seen like the big scrapers and stuff working, construction site, they would use this to level everything, so they get it with just enough fall, so when they flood irrigated, the water would just run across it. It wouldn't run too fast, it wouldn't run too slow. So they would grade hundreds of acres that way for irrigation. They, like I said, they would irrigate at the Paris Ranch, but then later on at the 1280 at Lakeview, they put in another one of those irrigation systems with a big wheel. So I believe they were probably growing alfalfa, or they might have been irrigating wheat or oats. I don't know. Haven't found it out yet. But they were serious. So this is a La Platte Cajote scraper attached to 100 D8s. They were moving dirt when they had to. They were filling in ruts. They were building things. Again, Lake Paris, one of their D8s. That particular one, the caption said they were pulling a chisel plow, 30-foot of chisel plow, and 3 10-foot grain drills. And that was, again, one of their Model 36s with a D8, 1949. That was, like I said, the backbone. They used these tractors and these harvesters clear up until 1966, when they were phasing out their farming operation in the area. They did try a self-powered harvester, or self-propelled harvester. This particular one, they told me, is a John Deere 95. I've seen a couple pictures of this one and a later one. That one there, this one I know was taken in Long Valley. And so, gives you an idea of the modernization of the stuff that they had. So you have all this equipment, you have to move it, right? So again, they used a military surplus truck. They probably had the trailer custom built. And this is taken to the Paris Ranch, so they would move this equipment all over the country. They move it from I think by the time they got this far along, they had sold the ranch in Hemet, and they were mainly working in Lakeview, Paris, Murrieta, and Long Valley. So, but they would move this equipment everywhere. Don't see these anymore. Used to see them pretty common laying around the ranch, called a chain carryall. Some of their implements that they used to pull, like a 10-foot Wheatland plow, you can't pull them down the road. So this thing would pick them up. You back it over whatever you're going to pick up. You hook some chains on it. You crank it. It would pick it up off the ground. You hook it to your truck, and you haul it away. This particular implement, a Southwest Ripper or a subsoiler, they use these extensively. Break up the hard pan. They used them when they were doing all their construction work. So we'll kind of move along. This particular picture here is actually the same picture that's right there. This is a Yoder camp at Long Valley. Like I said, they started farming in Long Valley 1921 all the way to 1966. So they built a house and all that stuff. This is one of David Yoder's pictures. So when I meet with him, I'll get more information about who was living out there, try to get an idea how many acres they had, and stuff like that, so that we can add it to the archives. Because now it's Maurice something winery out there.
Maurice Car'rie.
What's that?
Maurice Car'rie?
Yeah. And then I think the house is still out there in some of the barns. Earlier photo, Long Valley, again was one of the TD40s with a Wheatland plow. Again, Murrieta and Long Valley were rocky, steep, and prone to washout. So they were their own problem to work on because they were hard to plow, they were hard to harvest and all that kind of stuff. So here's another view of the size and scope. Again, this is Long Valley, pulling a disc harrow and 3 Wheatland plows. The background, you can see the truck, all those sacks on there. By this time they were bulk storing a lot of their grain. They were only sacking grain they were using for seed. This is Long Valley out the Yoder camp. You can see some of their buildings out there, and what you see here, that's grain. So they didn't have tanks or storage bins here, so they would auger it out of they dump it out of the truck, and it would stay there until they loaded it up and took it to the market. So it's pretty common. I know my uncle who farmed out in Winchester, he would bulk stack all his grain. It made for great dove hunting. So this is probably a classic picture of the scope of their farming operation. This is Long Valley. So what they tell you there, they're pulling 40-foot of 28-inch disc blades. These are 3 Wheatland plows. They're pulling it at 2.7, 2.8 miles an hour, third gear. This was 1948-49. And they would just all day long, they would pull this. What you had to realize is these discs were designed to pull one behind the tractor. They only had one drawbar. So ever inventive, this is how they lashed it up. So they hooked up this cable setup. They could actually adjust this as they went along. What you see there is that cable there went to the cable control unit on the back of the tractor, so they could actually move their gangs around, which they needed. Another fellow I know in Murrieta used to run these tractors for the Yoder group, and he was farming in Alta Murrieta, in the area around where the Sizzler is now. Well, he didn't cut his corner right there at the freeway, and he got himself into the corner and he couldn't pull the discs out. So he had to call Charlie, who was in charge of the outfit there. They had to break these all down and pull them out with another tractor and rehook them all back together to get them out of it. Because he tried to make the turn, couldn't make the turn. Well, you can't back up with something like that. So that's the kind of thing they ran into all the time. So they were a big operation. Like I said, they had a lot of equipment and a lot of land. So this, I believe, is in Long Valley. It's another David Yoder picture. I'm waiting to get more information on it. I don't know what they were building here, whether they were filling something in, they were making more farmland, I don't know. But if you look, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, there's 5 D8s there, plus all their equipment. There's that's a return Westinghouse scraper. There's another scraper. This is their Southwest Ripper. they had equipment on the scale of most medium to fairly large construction companies at that time. Because this was state-of-the-art equipment. This wasn't old stuff in the 40s and the 50s. Later on, in the early part of the 1950s, Charlie Yoder up there in Murrieta got into a flying bug. He wanted to start a flying club. Well, he hauled all the family equipment down there and built a runway. That's what they did back then. So, familiar to you guys, this is the feed lot down here, almost right across the road here is where it was at the Pava Ranch. And this picture shows some grain being dumped. I'm not sure, I'm thinking this is probably at the Pava Ranch. The only other place that might have any kind of grain set up like this would have been the Paris Ranch, and I never saw any pictures that said they had this kind of capability. So I'm thinking, and I'll confirm it with David Yoder, is that they were either storing grain or part of their payment to the Vail Company was in grain. So they were offloading grain there, and this would go into that grate, keep the heavy stuff out, go through a cleaner and a scale, and then go into the storage tank. And if that's the case, and once I find that out, I'll relay it back as part of the packing. The Vail was probably feeding that to his cattle. Again, another shot of the Yoder camp. The bulk grain, this is probably mid-1950s. Like I said, they were at the Long Valley Yoder camp until 1966. This is Long Valley. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 harvesters there working, so they were pulling at least 5 D8 cats. And that's probably that international self-propelled job we saw a little bit earlier. They were all in the same group of photos. Like I said, it was hilly, so this is what they call in all those Model 36, it's called a hillside harvest. So if you were working in this kind of terrain, you needed another guy. Because there was a guy, see that big wheel right there? That guy took care of that header. So as you went up the hill, that guy would have to reel that header up. So the header could be up or it could be down because the header went, the paddle went like this, the sickle bar cut it, threw it on a rotating canvas belt, and brought it into the separator part of the harvester. Well, for that harvester to do the separating, it had to be level. If it was on an angle like this, all the stuff would run to one side and just clog it up. So these older harvesters had this other big wheel. You get on the other side and you crank that sucker, and it would lift that side of the harvester up until it was level, so you could do that. Again, just the problem with this, I'm pretty sure is Long Valley. It might be Murrieta, but I'm thinking it's probably Long Valley. So this is about the end of our presentation. This is Lake Paris. Never ceased to amaze me. I pulled the disc a bit in my career and done some of that kind of stuff. How straight those guys could pull a disc. It's just amazing. So the story on the Yoder stuff is still continuing. So I have got probably more photos to scan, and then to get with David Yoder to get the history. This one I know is probably Paris or Lakeview because it's flat. Get into that, that's probably Long Valley, and David appeared to work Long Valley a lot more than his brother Charlie. Charlie was kind of centered in Murrieta, and I'm thinking David worked Long Valley a lot, so I need to set him down with these photos and get the full history, which is ultimately my goal. Like I said, Charlie passed away. He was a few weeks short of 99. It was a few weeks short of being 100. And David, I believe, is in his mid-90s. So it's a project that has kind of got a high priority for me, so I'm trying to get back with the family so we can get that done. So that kind of concludes my presentation. Do we have any questions off the get-go? Yes, ma'am. No, I haven't seen any of it. I've been an antique equipment aficionado for years. I'd love to find some of the early stuff that they had that MJ built over in the Hemet area, probably scrapped during one of the war drives. They pretty much got out of the business in the late 1960s. So, I'm sure back then people were still looking for that equipment. They might have auctioned it. Some of it might have stayed with the property when they sold it, especially in the French Valley area. So I don't know. I'll find out once I get to them. I never could get quite an answer out of Charlie. He said that in his particular case, he'd gotten rid of his equipment. All except one tractor. He kept a TD-24 tractor, a big Alice Chalmers tractor, and he got into the construction business with it afterwards. Kind of a funny thing, there was kind of a rub I caught between the two brothers about their preference on equipment. Charlie was an Alice Chalmers guy, but David was kind of a Caterpillar guy. And the whole rub was how they started. So I don't know if anybody here has messed with old equipment. Well, equipment of that era up until the mid-1950s, they didn't direct start. I mean, you didn't get on the tractor, heat the glow plugs, and crank it. So Caterpillar had on their starting thing, they actually had a 2-cylinder gas engine that was mounted next to the main motor. So you go through all this trouble, you start that 2-cylinder gas engine, and you had a clutch and everything, you would throw that in, and it would turn the main motor, and then it would start. So, but the 2-cylinder pony motors, they called them, were kind of bulky and stubborn, so sometimes they wouldn't start. So you couldn't get the pony motor started, you couldn't start the tractor, or you had to hook another tractor to and pull it to get it started. The Alice Chalmers and McCormick Deering used a different system where they would start on gasoline, and then you would switch them to diesel. So it had a carburetor and all that kind of stuff. Still had to crank it. So the only bad thing was when you got ready to shut them off, if you forgot to shut the diesel off and turn the gas back on, then you never get them started again because it would get diesel in the system and it wouldn't start. You couldn't crank it hard enough to start it on diesel. Yes, ma'am.
We have a really Caterpillar, a smaller Caterpillar tractor over at the headquarters property.
Oh, yeah?
And then we have a couple of pieces of equipment out here in our backyard. Good old, John Deere plow.
Yeah, that stuff kind of hangs around. So interestingly enough, the Vail company had a Case 500 tractor.
Okay.
So when Vail sold that Case 500 tractor went to the Rancho California Road Department. So I worked for the Rancho California Road Department for a few years. So I raced that tractor in the first tractor race in Temecula. And then I heard that a local third party has since bought it and still has it. So it'd be interesting to know where that tractor went. Always interested.
I said you drive that tractor around.
Oh, you guys have Tony Ashman's tractor, right?
Ford?
A little Ford, yeah.
Yeah, the Ford.
Because when my wife and I were kids, we would go down, they'd send us down to Murrieta Country Market, and Tony would come, he lived down on the other end of 2nd Avenue there. Well, Tony would come to the Murrieta Country Market. By then he was so old and bent over he couldn't get off. So he'd flag you down and you go in and buy whatever he wanted and he'd take it out. And that tractor would go in first gear idle all the way back. So it's interesting to see where a lot of this stuff even ended up. Yeah.
And a very small Alice Chalmers, meant for like working in groves.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Does anybody else have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
Where was the granary, I guess that was a granary, that you mentioned on either Pava or Palma? Where they...
It was the Vail Ranch feedlot, and it was...
Look past Home Depot.
He could probably tell you more exactly. It was like right on the other side of it.
Past Home Depot.
Yeah. And like I said, it was a full-blown feedlot.
Another question. Did you win the tractor race?
Not that year. I won a couple years with some other stuff, but not that year. I got stuck behind Tommy Hodgkiss and his gang, and they wouldn't let me pass it.
Those were fun.
Well, that first year they had the tractor race, they actually went down Pujol Cross by the old slaughterhouse, and then went up the main road back into town. Only year they let them do that. Highway Patrol had a fit, so. Anything else from anybody? Well, thank you guys. It's been a pleasure. Hope I haven't bored you too much. And I get more